We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for catching the door. You ready? Adam, could you give us a briefing on House Bill 2335? We'd like to take action on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2335 was a bill that was heard, I believe, last week. This is a bill that would authorize loans or grants for certain qualified track maintenance under the Rail Service Improvement Program. So essentially it would allow for the current program to include qualified track maintenance. It would also increase the transfer from the State Highway Fund to the Rail Service Improvement Fund, which is currently set at $5 million, and that would increase to $10 million. Questions for
Adam? Adam, I had one. This doesn't affect State General Fund, does it?
No, the transfer is made from the State Highway Fund to the within the State Highway Fund, then to this Rail Service Improvement Fund.
Committee, I would like to offer an amendment to this to change the enacting date to the register. Make that a motion. Do I have a second? Seconded by Senator Corson. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the committee pass out 2335 as amended, favorable for passage.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Bowers. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The bill's on its way. We'll now turn our attention to House Bill 2147. Adam, could you give us a briefing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2147 would amend the procedure for disposing of abandoned or towed vehicles. The new section 1 of the bill would require that the provider of a wrecker or towing service shall provide a certification of compliance, to a purchaser upon the sale and transfer of a vehicle that's essentially been towed. Their certification of compliance would allow the purchaser to apply for and receive a certificate of title from the Division of Vehicles that is free and clear of all liens, security interests, and encumbrances. The certification of compliance shall be in a form and a manner approved by the Secretary of Revenue. The entity that provides the towing or wrecking service shall be required to state that the entity has complied with the statutes providing for the disposition and the sale of such vehicle and any required inspection for vehicles registered and titled in another jurisdiction. Such inspections have been fulfilled. The certification of compliance form shall be subject to a $20 fee, and such fee shall be retained by the entity that processes the certification of compliance, which would usually be the Division of Vehicles, a contractor, or the county treasurer. So under Section 2 of the bill, public agencies, when selling or abandoning motor vehicles, just states that at a public auction shall provide the certification of compliance to a purchaser upon the sale and transfer of the vehicle, and whereby a purchaser may file with the Division of Vehicles for a certificate of title of such vehicle. And then moving to Section 3 would provide that the wrecker and towing providers are required to provide a certification of compliance to a purchaser upon the sale and transfer of a vehicle. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee, questions for Adam? Seeing none, thank you. We'll turn to our first proponent, Representative Hourkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senators. Appreciate the hearing on the bill and the opportunity to speak in support of the bill. The concept of the bill was first requested about 3 years ago from a salvage yard owner in St. Mary's, the city I live in, Mr. Steve Denton, who's also here today. And it took me a little bit to understand it, but kind of walk through the process of what happens with an abandoned vehicle. And go through the process all the way to the point of that vehicle getting crushed and going through the end of life process. And the first step is when there's an abandoned vehicle, a tow yard or a state agency, highway patrol, ends up getting that vehicle off the highway. And so a tow yard then has that vehicle in its possession. State statute requires the tow yard or public agency to notify the owners or lien holders that, hey, we have your vehicle in our tow lot. And there's a process they have to follow and a timeline they have to follow. Upon following that process and timeline, the tow yard or public agency fills out a piece of paperwork called a possessory loan affidavit. Once they fill that out, then they can sell that vehicle at public auction. The purchaser of that vehicle gets the possessory lien affidavit paperwork and a bill of sale, and then in theory can go to the county treasurer and get title. The problem that happened, if we have to split this into two different case scenarios, the purchasers of these abandoned vehicles at public auction are typically salvage yards. Every once in a while, there's individuals there as well. But the salvage yards, when they buy an abandoned vehicle, they're going to part it out and sell the parts, salvage parts. And then when they have it stripped down, they will end of life it. They're going to send it off to get crushed. The state of Kansas used to allow the possessory loan affidavit paperwork as the paperwork they could use to end of life that vehicle. However, about 4 or 5 years ago, the federal government in VITA's program, it's the VIN verification system, they changed the rules a little bit and said, no, you need a title to crush that vehicle and end of life it. So now the salvage yards have to take the possessory lien affidavit paperwork to the county treasurer and get a title. Here's where the problem came in. The possessory lien affidavit paperwork is a trust but don't verify process. So the tow yards or public agencies, they may have forgotten a timeline or they may not have notified all the prior owners or lien holders. In that case, the purchaser, the salvage yard, is not able to get title because the paperwork was not filled out properly. And so now they're in limbo and it's a big mess. So they can't legally end of life that vehicle, but to go back and notify prior owners when they've already parted out the vehicle, it doesn't make sense. So because of the change of the federal government, we're now having a business process that is not compatible with the reality. What this bill seeks to do is add a check in the system, in the process, so that when a salvage yard or public agency fills out that possessory lien affidavit paperwork, they'll have to take that to the county treasurer, and the county treasurer will do a pre-check on it to make sure that all prior owners were notified, lien holders were notified, the timeline was followed, and that the salvage yard is now able to sell somebody else's vehicle at public auction. It's a good check in the system to make sure these salvage yards are doing the proper notifications before selling somebody else's vehicle. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that hopefully later. One more little point on this. When we had the hearing in the House side, there was a little bit of hesitation. So the chair asked me to get together with several of the salvage yards, tow yards, also the Kansas Motor Carriers Association, and try to work out some questions on it. The result was realizing we couldn't put in statute, and the original bill had this, that the salvage or the tow yard would have to get title before selling it. They couldn't actually get title with the possessory lien affidavit process. So what we ended up saying is, well, since they can't get title, can we at least put a check in there, a check in the process to verify that they filled out all the paperwork correctly? And that was kind of the result of a couple-hour-long meeting with everybody involved, that we came up with the idea of just having the possessory lien affidavit paperwork get checked by the county treasurer and verify that, yes, the process was done properly, and then the vehicle can be sold at public auction. And so the hope is that the purchaser, when he gets the possessory lien affidavit paperwork, it'll be stamped, certified that, yes, this was done properly, and then they can go get title for that vehicle they purchased. So we ended up going through a lot of back and forth, trying to refine it. The House committee amended the bill, put in that new certification step, and I believe it passed the House floor unanimously. And Mr. Chairman, I know that you have one more proponent, Deanne Williams, and after that I would ask, even though they're not on the agenda, Mr. Steve Denton, also Heather Clam. They're both salvage yard owners here in Kansas, if they have a few minutes to kind of answer questions and explain their real life experience with this issue.
We'll allow that if they'd be agreeable to providing written testimony afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Representative Auerkamp? Wow. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Deanne Williams. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Deanne Williams, Executive Director for the Kansas Motor Carriers Association, and I appear here before you today representing our Towing and Recovery Division. We have about 150 members in that group, and so we've been in contact with those folks all through as we're working on this bill. The towing companies, of course, as Representative Auerkamp said, they follow strict guidelines as far as selling the abandoned vehicles to satisfy the loan, satisfy the towing and recovery possessory lien. And we often refer to these folks as the litter control officers of the highways and the streets. They go out and they pick up all of these abandoned vehicles that are, most of them, not roadworthy. And, as they go into, after they've filed everything that they need to, they go in and, get ready for public auction. Most of these vehicles won't bring hardly any money because they're either, worn out, been in an accident, whatever it might be, and they're just not worth much money. As we've had several conversations about everything in the different ways that we could abide by the things that are in this bill and making it easier for the salvage yards to be able to go out and get the title after the sale, make sure that everything has been done. And with the certification of compliance, we think that that's going to ensure that the paperwork is done correctly. And the towing and recovery folks are accepting the $20 fee that will go along with that. They see that as a good step in the right direction as far as making everything flow and they don't have to come up with things on the back end after the sale has happened. Currently, the salvage dealers, as we sell the vehicles to those folks, we think that everything's been done right. Maybe they haven't gotten the timeline down just right. Then the salvage dealers have to come back to the towing company, and then the towing company, has to go back and get the additional paperwork, and hopefully they can get that, and all owners have been notified. Sometimes that's not the case. So we understand where the salvage yards are coming from, and we really think that the certification will work. And by giving the county treasurers the $20, then that should work as far as their staff time goes. So it's not as if we're putting something on them and not willing to pay for it. So with that, then we'd like to thank especially Representative Auerkamp, the salvage dealers, the towing and recovery folks for working with us over the last few years on all of this. And as I said earlier, we think that this is a step in the right direction. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer those.
Committee questions for Deanne. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I do have a couple of questions. One, on the bill, I've noticed that there's quite a few items deleted that are not excluded anymore. Could you talk to that? And second, I know you're trying to improve the process, and this isn't language that's changing, but I would ask about the 15-day mailing notice, and there's another place in here where it's 15, allows the owner 48 hours to look at the vehicle. Since we're trying to improve the process, would this be the place to possibly address those timelines? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we did visit with Cador Legal, and, they said that as we move forward, if those are things that we do need to change, then we change them. But as far as the towing companies are concerned, we believe that is the 15 days is good. There are times that the towing company, they have the guideline of, you have to do this and this and this. And, if they miss one of those middle steps, then they have to start all over, and sometimes that does become an issue. And as far as taking all the language out, I believe, and, Adam can probably talk about this, but by doing the things that we're actually asking to do, then the language that was in there was just, it did not pertain to what we're asking to do right now.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask that quite a bit of this deletion, I just don't know if it has unintended consequences or not, but Adam may be able to look at that. Thank you.
Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subtracted, or the portion that's deleted, is not actually a repealed section. Minor, I wasn't really present during the House negotiations, but there was the original intent of the bill kind of got changed. So when they added the amendment, they just took out that first section. So essentially, the underlying law has no change in that first section. They just took that out of the bill, which is why it shows it's stricken. It's not actually a repealed. The statute is not repealed. It's the changes that were made. They essentially went a different direction with the new Section 1 that immediately follows it. So they took out the original, what was Section 1 of the bill, but that still stays in law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way it's written, it does look like a repeal, so thank you for that clarification.
Further questions for Deanne? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see this in somebody else's testimony, but maybe you can answer it. About the certified mailings, who pays for those?
The towing company does.
Okay. And regardless of where they have to go or anything, and they get 15 days, they're passed out, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And that's one way of notifying folks about it. Do you also use other steps? I know email and all of that is probably existent, but you may not always have an email number.
Yeah, no, I believe that everything is done by the certified because that's what statute says has to be done.
Okay. So the cost of this, I don't see I didn't see a fiscal note anywhere, I don't think, that went with this one. So I don't know what it means to the business owners or to a community at large.
Well, what it would, the towing companies are already paying for the certification. The only thing that they're going to pay for in addition is that $20 certification that they will receive. And if the vehicle is an out-of-state vehicle, of course, they have to have a VIN verification, and the salvage yard pays for that as they register the vehicle.
All right.
And that's the way it is currently.
Oh, I have one more question, if you don't mind. How do you know if it's a stolen vehicle or anything of that sort, if they're trying to get rid of it and keeping track of vehicles, I suppose?
They have to go out and run a report, and it tells them who those owners are. And then, of course, Highway Patrol, they notify them, and then they would have a list of, or on their computers, they show what vehicle was stolen by the VIN number.
Thank you. I appreciate your response.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deanna, just a quick question on the timeline that I don't do the paperwork, but we do tow vehicles in with our dealerships. It's a pretty tight timeline to let the people know that you have that vehicle in your PIN. I was thinking it was 10 days, but maybe it's 15 days. If that timeline isn't followed, then you have to go through the court system once you get down through the end. Does this certification stop? Would that override going through the court system if we didn't get the timeline just right? Francis, do you know that? It is very, very costly for a vehicle that is worth $100 and you pay $1,000 to go through the court system. So I'm hoping hope this overrides the timeline. So what do you know, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, as I understand it, there was a lot of back and forth via email with the attorney with the Department of Revenue Division of Vehicles on this topic. He was extremely helpful at helping us bring it together as far as our thoughts on it. The question did come up on this specific issue. If one of the timelines or processes was not followed, that limbo state where they have to do what's called a quiet title, I think is the process. What I believe happens is when the possessory lien affidavit paperwork is not done properly and the vehicle is sold at public auction, the purchaser then has the vehicle, can't get title, and that's where the complication begins. As I understand it, and I could be wrong here, but with this, if this bill passes, there is now a step before the vehicle is sold at public auction to have that paperwork checked. And if the paperwork is checked by the county treasurer, and that's going to be the most common, and the county treasurer says, no, you actually didn't follow the timeline, then as I understand it from the attorney from the Division of Revenue Vehicles, they are able to go back and repeat that same timeline. And so this bill would actually give them the opportunity to go back and do it properly and not have to go through that quiet title process. So there may be a very good unintended consequence to this bill, and that would allow the tow yards a second chance at getting their paperwork corrected so they don't have to go through that crazy titling process through the courts.
And and I can tell you in the real world circumstances, the towing company or the shop could be waiting for the insurance companies to work with the people, so therefore the staff doesn't send out this letter stating we have your vehicle, and therefore it throws that off of the timeline. So I do make sure that our girls know to send that letter regardless of that 10 or 15 days, but that's the catch in the past that I've noticed. So not going through the quiet title court system will alleviate a lot of that time, those folks that don't need to deal with this if we can fix it this way. Representative.
Mr. Chairman. Thanks. So that question did come up from the tow yards, right? About a week ago, they were concerned about the timeline and they asked, is it possible to extend that timeline a little bit more? And that's where the attorney came in and he said, actually, the timeline is only a pain because if the vehicle's sold, then they're not able to go back. But if the vehicle's not sold at public auction, they can go back and repeat that process and get it corrected. So that's where the tow yards did bring that up, but the attorney kind of said, no, they can still go back.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Dan, do you know how long the vehicle's on the highway before the highway patrol or the sheriffs have it towed?
48 hours.
48 hours?
Yeah.
Further questions? See none, thank you. I guess next we have a Steve Denton.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, everybody, for letting us testify for this. They did a great job of the timeline and all that stuff, so I'm not going to repeat all of that. A couple of questions that got brought up I want to address is, one, the stolen vehicles. The process with the stolen vehicles, the idea is for the state to catch it before, the county to catch it before they sell the vehicle to us, because once we get it, there's not much for us to do to go through that process other than the police department coming out, or highway patrol coming out and taking possession of the car, and which I practically had to go through one time even though it wasn't stolen. But it's not to try to do more work for the tow companies other than just getting the certification saying it's all correct. It's not trying to create any more expenses for them. When we go to a tow lot auction, most tow lot auctions have a titling fee or a paperwork fee that they charge us, and that can be whatever they want. There's no set amount. So whatever extra fees there are for the $20 certification fee, they can just pass that on to us. And if they feel like they need an extra $10 for going down to the county courthouse to do that, they can charge us for that too, on top of the cost of the vehicle. The only thing that was mentioned earlier is that most of these vehicles aren't worth much money. The starting bid, you said a vehicle, $100. I'm assuming that's not an auction car, because the last 15 auctions I've been to, the starting bid on those cars is $300. So they at least recover the costs of the vehicle and the tow and the process of doing everything. And most of the vehicles, I've got copies of checks in here that I'll provide as evidence and stuff. I've spent $5,000, $30,000 at auctions buying cars, so they do make money off of most of the cars. There might be a few that they don't make a lot of profit on, but there's some cars they make $5,000, $10,000 off of. So they're not losing money by this process. We're not trying to hurt the tow lot industry at all. We're just trying to make it easier on us. How this started with me was back in, I think it was late 2018. I provided my paperwork through the state for the Invitas laws and thought everything was fine. They sent out an inspector to our facility, and the lady came in and said, I need to see all your titles and this and that. And we had all titles except for 7 vehicles. We just had the bill of sale and the affidavit paperwork that we'd gotten from tow lots. And she said that was no longer acceptable. She said, to be in compliance with the law, you'll have to get the titles or you'll be subject to $10,000 fine per vehicle. And, at the time, that scared the heck out of me because I'm a small business and, I know that probably wasn't going to happen to that extent, but $70,000 would have detrimented our business very badly. So at that point, I tried to figure out what we need to do, and most of them, the part that we hadn't done or that the tow lots didn't do was get inspections on the vehicle or verify that the vehicle didn't have any liens against it or who the proper owner were. So I called the Highway Patrol, had them come out to inspect some vehicles, 7 of them. And apparently they thought that I was selling stolen vehicles because 3 officers showed up, 2 of them and their captain, and did everything but handcuff me to the car and inspected, spent 3.5 hours there inspecting cars, and then came into me and asked me why I'm going through all this process. And I had to explain to them because they had no idea that the law said that at that point. Since then, it's gotten a little more friendly, but that time was a very scary day, to say the least. And then a couple examples of the things that we experienced. Shortly after that, I'd bought a vehicle out of Manhattan at a tow lot, and I got a call about 6 months after we'd purchased the vehicle from what's the name of the company? It was a Santa Monica title and loan company out in California. Wanted to know why we had parts off of a 17 Fusion listed on the internet. And I said, I'm not sure what you mean. We bought the vehicle legally through a tow lot, actually had the title on that one and everything because everything had gone through. And they said that it couldn't be possible because they owned the title. Apparently somewhere in that process, they didn't get the proper notification or go through all the steps correctly, and they weren't notified of it. And they told me I couldn't sell any more parts off of it, and that I needed to provide the car back to them. I said, well, that's going to be difficult. I've already sold most of the stuff off the vehicle. And so we were kind of in a limbo there, and he threatened a lawsuit against me, and I told him he'd have to talk to my attorney, and that if they wanted the vehicle back, they'd have to pay for storage fees for me for the last 6 months and stuff, and they had finally decided it wasn't worth it and went on. The vehicle wasn't worth much. It was hit completely down the right side, so it wasn't like it was worth, $20,000 to them or whatever they had invested in the vehicle. Another time we had a vehicle was I think it was a 06 HHR that I bought, and again, the company didn't go through the proper process of getting all the liens works. After 6 months of going back and forth, it was a local vehicle, so we tried to work with them to get it done. After 6 months and about 4 or 5 trips and I don't know how many emails and phone calls between the county courthouse and the tow lot, we finally got it done. Between the driving back and forth 25 miles to the courthouse and 25 miles to Manhattan, it got to be quite expensive to get the title. By the time we got done with that, I probably lost money on that vehicle just to try to meet the laws. So those are some of the problems that we've had in the past. Before this law came about, like I said, we would submit the bill of sale and the paperwork and everything was fine. Until COVID hit, I really didn't buy a whole lot of tow lot vehicles. So it wasn't as big a deal. Since COVID, the number of vehicles that are at the auctions for sale at the salvage auctions in Kansas City and Wichita have reduced dramatically. So I had to start purchasing more vehicles from tow lots. I know Kurt purchases a lot more than I do, Kurt and Heather, so it didn't affect me as much. So it wasn't as big a deal till about 2 or 3 years ago, and it got to be very costly and very time consuming. Sorry I did not provide written testimony ahead of time. I thought you got stuff from the House hearings, so I'm more than welcome to submit everything that I have here today for you. Some of it's just emails that I have. Some of it's a written testimony that I prepared for the other hearing. And any questions you have for me, I'd be glad to answer.
Committee questions, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony, and understand that your written testimony was submitted to the House, but just a little bit about who you are and what your business is. I can't tell, I don't have your written testimony, and I can't read your shirt to tell what you do.
Sorry. I'm Steve Denton. I'm the owner of Denton Auto Salvage. We have 2 facilities, one in St. Mary's, Kansas, and one in Carbondale, Kansas. I have about 25 employees. We sell to body shops and mechanical shops, dealerships, used car lots, and just the general public in general too. We deal with a lot of insurance companies and stuff like that.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I may, a follow-up question as well. The bill amends statute at 8-1103, and this is maybe a question for the reviser. That statute isn't amended by this bill, but how is it impacted? It provides at subsection D of 8-1103 that a person providing towing services shall not tow a vehicle to a location outside of Kansas without the consent of, and it lists 3 different entities or persons who can provide consent, and one is the insurance company processing a claim with respect to the vehicle. Does this bill affect the sale at auction of the vehicles that are impacted if the vehicle is towed outside the state of Kansas? I wouldn't think it would, because it wouldn't be a sale in Kansas.
I am not 100% sure, but the way I understand it, counties and or cities control who tows their vehicles. I don't think they can tow a vehicle out of state unless it's personally done by the owner of the vehicle to have it picked up. I'm not positive on that. I know, like in our county and stuff, everything is towed has to be contracted ahead of time with 2 or 3 tow lots, and they're responsible for all the tows. So I don't think that would ever happen, that a vehicle would be towed for being left abandoned, unless the owner called a tow lot and had said, "Would you go pick this up for me and bring it back?" But I'm not 100% sure on that, Deanne. Might be able to, yeah.
And if it's towed outside the state of Kansas, then this bill wouldn't have any impact about the sale here in Kansas. So am I correct on that?
Adam?
Thank you. It took me a minute to get back to, I remember the provision you're referring to, and yeah, it's on page 7, line 24. Those provisions were inserted 2 or 3 years ago, dealing with towing out of state, I think mainly from the metro area, if I recall, issues with, calling for a tow truck and, going across state line without, any sort of consent. What this bill actually would do would require, so essentially that prevents that instance of a tower without any consent taking the car across state lines. This bill is from the sale between the tower to these to a purchaser. So I'm not sure that there'd be much application beyond that. I guess if I could clarify on the question, but.
Thank you, and appreciate that answer. And essentially, you're impacting people's personal property when you tow it and sell it, and so just want to make sure that we're providing due process along the way. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Committee for the questions. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Denton, for your testimony. I'm curious, it's not part of the bill, but it is part of language in current statute in this section, and it's the 15-day notice. And to me, that seems, it's the public agency that from the date they mail the notice, you have, then they can start publicizing after that. So it doesn't seem like a lot of turnaround for somebody that does have a vehicle that's missing or stolen.
If I'm not mistaken, we have done nothing to the bill that is creating a shorter timeline.
Right,
It's already existing.
Right.
But I believe the way it goes now, it's either 10 or 15 days, but they have to send out notification to that owner. Then they have to publicize it in the paper for another
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So they've got a full month to do it. It's not like the 15th day, if they don't respond, they can't get the vehicle back. They still have that full month's time to do something and process it.
Yeah, and it looks like the only notice that it goes out in is the county that it's found. But You wouldn't mind if we took a little bit deeper dive on that section, would you?
It's not going to affect my end of it. I don't know if the tow lots would have a problem with that or not. It's not going to affect my end of it. My interest in this, and at first when we were doing this, I didn't know all the details of how it would affect the tow companies. And my intent was not to try to create more work or a hassle or more expenses incurred by them. It was simply that when I go get a title, or when I go get the title for that vehicle, I want to be able to walk in the courthouse and walk out with the title without having to fight and discussing and make 20 emails and phone calls and driving back and forth and stuff. So I don't think we've done anything that's making it tighter. So if that existing law needs to be changed, that's between kind of the Division of Motor Vehicles and you all here. Originally, we wanted to try to have it set to where we got the title from the tow lot company, and that wasn't able to, the way the statute reads, it's not able to be done. I don't know how that process would change as far as the timeline up front. Part of the problem is you have tow lots that have small facilities. They may be on an acre or less. If they've got 30 vehicles there and you're going to make them wait 45, 60 days to sell the vehicle, they'll be out of business within a year.
Yeah, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, this committee may not be aware, but the Commerce Committee just worked legislation earlier this week, or last week, that addresses the towing and the vehicle. So it's kind of interesting that the same topics in this committee also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Kurt, did you have something you wanted to add? Or Heather? If you would provide your name and then your testimony to either Representative Auerkamp, he can get it to our committee assistant.
I will do that. I'm Heather Clam. I'm representing A&A Auto and Truck Parts. We are a salvage yard here in Topeka. My parents, Kurt and Jane Lewis, own A&A Auto and Truck Parts, and I basically run their offices. So I deal with the paperwork, and I'm the one that does all the titling. So this has impacted us greatly since 2018 when they started enforcing the bill where we had to get titles. One thing, the biggest part of my testimony, which I'll go in and make sure it's typed up and matches how we've adjusted the bill since we met in February with the House, because originally we did want the tow companies to get titles. That way it was verified that their paperwork was correct because they had a title. But legally we were told by the Department of Revenue that they could not do that because the statute was written for them to sell through the possessory lien affidavit, which makes sense. But then we decided what the best thing to do was to add a part of this where they had to verify that their paperwork was correct. Just to give you an example, I know Steve had some very specific examples, but I took 48 applications for title, and I was only able to get 12 titles in this paperwork. So 36 applications were rejected because the paperwork that the tow companies had provided us was wrong. And it's wrong for a multitude of reasons. I brought 4 today that were just kicked back last week just for random reasons, so now I'm gonna go back and have to fix all those. But it's, if the mailing timeline's off, which again, people make mistakes, and I understand that, but they've sold us a vehicle now, and I can't do anything with it, and that's where our biggest problem lies. We purchased a Fiat at auction that had previously been titled in Kansas. We got it inspected because we found out that a title had been issued elsewhere prior to the sale. It was a whole mess. The insurance company wanted us to relinquish the vehicle, which we ended up working with them to do, but that was all found after we had bought the car. So there's the biggest issue that we found was there's really has been no accountability on the tow lots to actually follow the possessory lien affidavit. And so that's basically what we're asking, is that here I have done this paperwork correctly, it's been certified, and now I'm giving you this information so you can go get a title, and not selling us vehicles that we can't title. The state has told us, well, if there is an issue, really your only route is to get a quiet title or sue the tow company. And we do business with the tow companies. We don't want to sue them. We want to have a working relationship with them, and that's how we've been working with them to get this bill to where it's at now. Sorry, I'm nervous.
Committee questions? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question. That's one of the hardest positions to do in this building is testify. You guys have done great.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In real life, I'm a car dealer, so I do the title work, and oftentimes it's the cleanup work, which is what you're doing. So I admire everything you said. It was spot on. And sometimes you haven't caused this mess. You have to figure out how to solve this mess. And oftentimes it is that quiet title process, which is very costly, time-consuming. And if we can avoid going into the court system with that, I'm anxious to give it a try. So thank you. And you did a nice job.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Are there any further proponents wishing to testify on the bill? Are there any neutrals? Any opponents? We'll close the hearing on 2147. With that, committee, we are adjourned.